I already established that LEGO is like Minecraft when I built my working piston. Ooh, but what if I made a working dispenser? By the way, this build ended up being super complicated and cool, so make sure you stick around to the end. I found out before that giant redstone Minecraft blocks makes for really cool LEGO builds, so I can use that same plan to build a dispenser and then build a button on top that activates it. I want to use the same technique as I did with the piston and use a bunch of black pieces around the edges to copy the look of the in-game dispenser. But in order to do that, with the 2x2 bricks, I'm going to need over 100, and I definitely don't have that many, so I had to get creative. I used a combination of tall panels, plates, and bricks, and eventually got them high enough. Okay, now that we have the frame in place, I need to start filling out the walls. Luckily, I have all the plates and bricks left over from when I built my piston, so I shouldn't have to order any extra. And yes, the piston has been destroyed for months. It's actually really nice because instead of a ton of detail on every inch of the block like the piston, over 1/3 of it is just entirely light gray pieces. Once I laid down the layer of gray on 3 of the sides, I started working on the cobblestone texture of the top half of the block. The main problem is the lightest gray on the top of the dispenser is darker than the bottom part, but I only have 2 gray colors to choose from, so I don't have much contrast. I also started using white as a highlight and put a strip down between the 2 sections. The white also came in handy for the face of the piston, but I don't need to think about that yet. I slowly built up the sides of the dispenser and realized that every side is actually the exact same texture. So I built all 3 walls at the same time, which saved me a ton of boredom. Okay, now that the back and side walls are done, I can work on the front, which has a lot more detail. For the light parts, I added out white outlines such as around the mouth, eyes, and shape of the face thing. Underneath the white, I put light gray, and above it, I added the same cobblestone texture that the rest of the sides have. Once all the textures were done, I added a 1 pixel thick layer of black around the top, and with that done, it's mechanism time. Here we go. When I first started building this, I was going to use a button to activate the dispenser that presses down on one of these. It's one of LEGO's spring-loaded shooters, and I'm going to use it as some sort of tipped arrow. Disclaimer, I ended up finishing this, but it felt really underwhelming by how it turned out, and made something better. But I'm still going to give you a quick and brief summary of how I built it, because the mechanism is still what I used in the finished model, and it just helps it make sense. Basically, there are these rubber bands inside the hook to this button, which I built using the same cobbled texture as the dispenser. It has a long Technic beam assembly below it with these weird ball pin pieces that hold onto the rubber bands, and then it has this holder that fits around the beams and connects to the actual dispenser. Then I made a black box, put the 1x4 launcher piece in the center of it, and set it back a couple pixels from the mouth. Then I made the top of the dispenser by using a bunch of 2x2 tiles in both grays to make it the right texture. I also added a bunch of supports to hold it up, and then tested it. Okay, let's see what my friend thinks. Okay, it's time to make this better, and way more complicated. Here we go. First off, I want to dispense an arrow when the button is pressed, so I need to build an arrow. It's not going to be as long as the in-game one because it wouldn't fit inside the dispenser, and unlike Minecraft, I can't just change the scale to suit each application. I still wanted to have that pixelated look, so I went with a diagonal building technique that makes the sides look like the jagged in-game texture. I also added a gray tip and these white feathers at the end. Alrighty, with that part done, I can move on to the super easy part of making everything work consistently. Like I said, super easy. First off, I need to add rubber bands to the mouth of the dispenser so that it launches the arrow. It took way too many tries, but I eventually got this design, and it has an adequately sized hole for the arrow, as well as 2 rubber bands hooked in place that fit perfectly in the feather part of the arrow. When I pull the black box in place and secured it into the mouth of the dispenser, I can pull the arrow back, and it will launch. Okay, now that that's finished, I need to make some way to hold the arrow in place when the pulled back position so that it only shoots when the button is pressed and not as soon as it's loaded. I need something that basically works as one of these binder clips. Obviously, the real thing is way too hard to press and would just bend or snap anything made of LEGO trying to open it, so I need to make a LEGO version. If I use these L-shaped Technic beams with larger beams connected behind them, and then use the same small ball pins and hook rubber bands to it, it makes a clip that when pushed down on the back opens up. Also, this video doesn't have a sponsor, but I do have channel memberships, and every single dollar that I make from there goes back into buying pieces to make my videos better. So if you're interested, the button's down below. Then I built a simple structure to hold it in place, which for some reason to me looks like a creature. But maybe it's just me, I don't know, comment if you see what I mean. Now that the locking mechanism in place, I need to make the button a lot different. The top of it will work out, but because the clamp has to be opened from a Technic beam at the back, just having a straight beam below the button won't work. At first I tried using angled Technic beams to shift the force of pushing down on the button to the back of the dispenser, but there was too much flex and it wouldn't hold. Then I decided to use a completely opposite technique and use only normal bricks. I basically made a not very sturdy beam thing underneath the button that slowly branches behind it to hit the beam and make the clamp open. All you need to know is that the rubber bands were not strong enough to pull it back up once pressed, and that instead of pressing down on the button, it would start tilting backwards, which isn't exactly what I was trying to do. I decided that I needed to make the whole button weigh less, so I started by taking away all the large bricks underneath it and using a mix of Technic and normal bricks. This way the connection at the top could be strengthened, but the space in between wouldn't require as many pieces, therefore being lighter. I added a line of bricks at the bottom so that it would be stronger when hitting the back of the clamp. Okay, testing time. I didn't have any rubber bands on it yet, but I just wanted to see if it would actually press down the clamp and release the arrow. I put the arrow in, pulled the button up, pushed it, and yeah. So I thought I was basically done. See that thumbs up? That is coming from a naive, ignorant, okay, maybe not, but I really didn't know how much more was in store for me. It might look easy just watching these videos, but these builds are pretty complicated, especially since I can't even access this one from the sides and could barely have any room to move my hands around from the top. In other words, a sub would be great. There is one major problem with the design. The rubber bands aren't strong enough to pull the button back up even though I already reduced the weight, and since it doesn't work if the button doesn't move, obviously, I need to figure out a better solution than rubber bands. And what's that, you might ask? LEGO suspension pieces. I think they will have just enough movement to open the clamp enough to fit the arrow in and be able to lift the button high enough to release the arrow. And as they are much stronger than rubber bands, it shouldn't be too hard to make work. I modified the button to fit into these 1x2 Technic bricks with a pinhole in the center, and then built these structures to hold the other end of the springs. I had to use some of these tall panel pieces to hold it up, but we are definitely getting somewhere. And I'm not sure it's somewhere that works. After half an hour of nearly rage quitting over a couple thousand plastic molded feet killers, I got to the point where the only evident problem was lowering the strings by a single plate so that it would open the clamp further, allowing the arrow to fully fit. Okay, now that that's fixed, it works, so I'm going to put the top plate back on, and it should be finished. Okay, well that's totally not infuriating, especially since it's completely my fault that I didn't realize that this brick would offset the entire button by a half stud, meaning it won't fit right into the hole at the top of the block. In other words, I had to take out the springs yet again and risk breaking the weak internal structure. But after a couple minutes, where I think I forgot to breathe, it was done. Okay, hopefully the final moment of truth. Here we go. Let's go. I just built a working Minecraft dispenser out of LEGO, and it's pretty cool. More cool videos on the horizon. Make sure to subscribe.